And your wife.
So we'll call the meeting back to order. And Michael has done quite a lot of work in trying to figure how much our farmers' cost of production may vary from other neighboring states that are in the federal order with us, because we're all in this federal order, and that's a set price for the entire order. So Michael has done, I'd say, a lot of research into additional costs that our farmers have encountered and have to cover, and there's no compensation, or there's no figuring that cost into the federal milk market order. So Michael, welcome, and the floor is yours.
So I am going to talk about the major environmental requirements that are unique to Vermont for dairy farming. I'm then going to try to estimate the cost of complying with those requirements, and then look at the revenue that's brought into the state that goes to farmers from state revenue sources and from federal revenue sources. And try to show you effectively the cost per hundredweight of environmental compliance for farmers after a federal offset. Then I'm going to talk about some other unique state environmental compliance requirements for farms, and then do a little spreadsheet at the end to show what, say, a typical MFO might have to pay in a year for environmental compliance costs, and what that comes out to per hundredweight if they are the average farm producing 2.6 million pounds of milk a year. So first off, the federal milk market order 1. The market order, as Dan explained earlier, is set to provide certain terms, definitions, and provisions that are common across each state within the milk market. They're supposed to take into account cost of production or parity, but the cost of production contemplated are the costs such as feed, not environmental costs. There's a location adjustment in the order, but it's more about transit and demand, not about your varying regulatory structures from state to state. And therefore, the order does not provide any differential between states based on the varying costs of environmental compliance. And that's important because not all states are environmentally equal. What you see on the screen in front of you on the right is the phosphorus TMDL for Lake Champlain. And on the left is the implementation plan, the state laws and other requirements that EPA required the state to pass in order to approve the TMDL on the right. This is specific and unique to Vermont. Even though New York discharges or has runoff into Lake Champlain and contributes phosphorus to Lake Champlain, New York is not subject to these requirements. They're specific to Vermont, and I'll talk about what some of those requirements are in a minute and how they are distinguished from New York. So why did that EPA TMDL focus on Vermont and specifically on agriculture? Because they said in that TMDL that 40% of the overall phosphorus load, sources of phosphorus to the lake, are from agriculture. Therefore, there needed to be additional management efforts in that sector in order to reduce the reductions from farming. And so what happened is that the General Assembly enacted Act 64, 2015, and it has multiple provisions in it for all sectors that contribute pollution to Lake Champlain, but it has very, very specific provisions in it regarding agriculture. It required the RAPs to be amended to more specifically address nutrient runoff, how to store nutrients, how to land apply nutrients. It required small farms to start certifying that they met the RAPs. It required water quality training for custom applicators and for all farms. So it imposed some significant conditions and requirements on farms in Vermont that are not required for New York farmers or any other farmer in the milk market order. And in addition, these were requirements that were built on top of a regulatory structure that was already in place and that I'm going to talk about in a minute. But the one thing I wanted to further talk about with regard to the TMDL is that you, Vermont, can't escape it. EPA issued it. The implementation plan that implements the TMDL is state-based law, but EPA also built into the TMDL what they call an accountability framework. It's a report card. It's metrics or benchmarks that the state has to meet in order to retain the ability to self-enforce the TMDL. And if the state doesn't meet these requirements, or if they're not properly enforcing these requirements, EPA reserves the authority to come back in and to start enforcing their enforcement tools in Vermont instead of the state-based laws and requirements. And that's significant for farming because one of the enforcement tools that EPA retains, if they were to come back in, is to permit every single farm in Vermont. And so that is, it sounds scary, but actually in New York, every farm there is supposed to have a NIPDES permit, that Federal Clean Water Act discharge permit. And in New York, those farms, some of them, can actually discharge manure to water because they have a permit. And we'll come back to that in a minute in the distinction between New York and Vermont.
Michael, they're all CAFOs over there, right?
They've all been designated by the New York DEC as CAFOs, and they've all been required to get a permit. And they have two permits. They have one that's built on the old 2004 EPA CAFO rule, which I'll talk about in a minute, which allows those farms to discharge. And they have another permit that's going into effect in January. That's going to be more strict, but it still has some ability for them to do activities that are not allowed in Vermont. Like the main one that people bring up is that they can spread on snow. They can spread manure on snow, which means that they don't have to have a manure lagoon that's big enough that's going to last them through the winter. So they don't have that cost that a Vermont farm has of making sure that they have a sufficient structure that will last them through the winter time.
Thank you.
So I was talking about the 2004 EPA rule, and that is when Vermont actually enacted many specific requirements for agricultural water quality. And one of the first things in its purpose section in 6 VSA chapter 215, which is where all the agricultural water quality requirements are, is that the purpose of the chapter is to ensure that agricultural animal waste do not enter the waters of the state. But it also has a very significant public policy statement that the cost of meeting these standards shall not be borne by the farmers only, but rather by all members of society who are in fact the beneficiaries of these requirements. I want to, hopefully you'll keep that in mind as I move through. So we get
I don't think that's quite true, though, the way it's working.
Well, I'm going to get to that.
The state's given a lot of money, though.
Well, they're not covering.
Well, I appreciate that.
We're going to get to that. So why is this EPA rule up? Because in 2003, EPA said, well, let me step back. Under the Federal Clean Water Act, any discharge of a pollutant from a point source needs to be permitted. And the way that the Federal Clean Water Act defines a point source, it equates a concentrated animal feeding operation to a pipe or a ditch. So any pollutant that runs off of the production area of a CAFO is the same as like pollutant coming out of the end of a pipe. So except there's this provision that says except for agricultural stormwater discharges. When this rule was first enacted, nobody knew what an agricultural stormwater discharge was. Literally, I was in a room with like 6 different attorneys at the time. We're all arguing what it meant, and nobody really knew. Well, the courts had figured it out. The courts have figured out that they said your production area is like the pipe. Your fields where you spread your manure is not like the pipe, as long as you're applying that manure and other nutrients according to site-specific conditions. And that is what agricultural stormwater is. So if it rains and you've applied your manure according to site-specific conditions, that's not a discharge. You don't need a permit for that. But if you have a discharge from your production area, there's runoff from your production area, you have some sort of ditching from your production area to a water, you have leachate from your bunk silo to a water, that is all something that needs a permit under the Federal Clean Water Act. But you see that little text there on the right? It's tiny, that is literally the size of that text. It is the preamble to the 2003 EPA rule. And there is a statement in that rule that the Agency of Agriculture, the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, seized on in 2004. And that statement is, states are encouraged to work with state agriculture agencies, conservation districts, USDA, and other stakeholders to create proactive programs to fix the problems of small and medium operations in advance of compelling facilities to apply for NIPD's permits. What does that mean? It means the Agency of Agriculture can require farms not to discharge and can require farms to have a nutrient management plan, and then they're not going to be subject to the Federal Clean Water Act. And the Agency of Agriculture would retain regulatory authority over those farms instead of it going to A&R, because A&R is the EPA delegated clean water entity in Vermont. So in order to keep farms underneath the Agency of Agriculture and to not make them subject to A&R regulation, to not make them subject to getting a NIPD's permit, a federal permit, which even though New York allows them, and New York allows farms to discharge under those NIPD's permits, what the state did, what this legislature did, is that all of the farms are going to be regulated by the Agency of Agriculture, but you're going to have to follow specific to Vermont rules. You can have no direct discharges of waste. You have to have a nutrient management plan. Every farm has to have a nutrient management plan. Under the MFO rules, you have to have 25 feet of buffer next to any adjacent water. You can't generate any runoff from your production area. If you're a small farm, you have the same basic requirements. You have to have nutrient application according to UVM's requirements, which basically requires a plan. You can't have any discharges, and all nutrients needed to be accounted for. So what that does is it never triggers the Federal Clean Water Act, because you don't have a discharge and you're applying according to site-specific conditions. And then the General Assembly required small farms to certify that they do it. Medium farms have to report every year. Medium farms are inspected every 3 years. Large farms have to report every year. Large farms are inspected every year. And so there's significant cost for the state and for each farm in meeting this state unique structure of having the Agency of Agriculture regulate these farms so that they don't cross over into A&R's jurisdiction and require a federal permit. But that costs money. And so the first cost to these farms is that they have a permit fee, which they did not have. When I first started at Ledge Council, there was almost no fees on farms. But now there are many fees on farms. And this is probably one of the biggest ones. For a medium farm, it's $1,500. For a large farm, it's $2,500 a year. And then when the Agency of Agriculture amended the RAPs in 2016 in response to Act 64, they did an estimate of what it would cost each farm to implement some of these requirements, and it's an annual cost. So buffers, when you're taking your corn crop out of production and leaving it to be just a vegetated, unharvested buffer, well, that's going to cost you money every year. And they estimated that it would be cost $4,500 to $20,000. Your nutrient management plan, which you have to update effectively every year to every 3 years, that's going to cost you $3,000 to $10,000 a year. And then to implement your plan, it's going to be $3,000 to $50,000 a year. Now, the costs obviously depend on your size of your farm, whether or not you're innovative, and whether or not you're doing things that will help your farm be proactive in addressing its site conditions. But on average, the agency estimated that compliance with the agricultural water quality requirements that are in effect now, beginning in 2016, would cost up to $180,000 a year for some farms. Now, those are probably outliers. I'm trying to use a number closer to the mean of $90,000 annually of what it would cost most farms in the state to comply with the ag water quality requirements.
And that isn't just for the Lake Champlain, that's every farm in the state.
That's
correct?
every farm in the
Right.
state, because the Clean Water Initiative, when it was enacted in Act 64, it was inspired by the Lake Champlain TMDL, but there's also the Connecticut River TMDL. There's also the TMDL for Memphremagog. There's also TMDLs for other waters in the state. And so the General Assembly adopted what they called an all-in approach. So it wasn't going to be focused just on the Champlain watershed. It was going to be focused on everywhere in the state.
Thank you.
So the state does provide grant assistance to farmers. And for example, just this past year, there's about $7 million in the various appropriation bills to the agency for capital assistance grants and water quality projects. And the state aid is capped. And the demand often exceeds the supply of the aid available. For example, the average state best management practices grants are maxed out at $200,000 per farm every 3 years. The capital assistance equipment program is $50,000 a year, and it's oversubscribed. And then the federal NRCS equip program, you max out at $450,000 per farm every 5 years. So not every farm gets the max. Not every farm gets capital assistance equipment grant every year. Not every farm is getting $200,000 of state DEP money every 3 years. And then almost all grants come with what's called a cost share requirement for the farm, meaning it costs the farm money or in-kind services in order to receive the grant. So I'm sorry, I wish this graph and table was a little bit more readable, but it's the best I could do. This shows the amount of state money that has been appropriated directly to agricultural water quality since state fiscal year 2016. When you add up the specific direct state appropriations, it's 48 million plus the ARPA money, which was around 9 million. And that's about $57 million, a little more than $57 million.
Does that, my eyes are your graphs too little or my eyes aren't good enough? Does it start going up, Mike, at 16
Yeah, it's
or
It's pretty
17?
even until 2016. It's in
Yeah.
2017 is when it
27.
starts going up.
That's the big,
And there's also a report that ANR does about the federal revenue that the state receives for water quality improvement in Vermont. And that report is broken down by sector, but it doesn't show your total for sector each year. And in addition, some of these funds don't go directly to farmers. For example, one of these rows is money to hire $40,000 to hire somebody to do CREP conservation easements. That's not money going directly to a farmer. But if you add up all the money that's identified as agriculture in these federal revenue reports since federal fiscal year 2017, you get $120 million of federal money that's been received for agricultural water quality. Again, it's not all going to a farmer, but I'm just going to use this number for purposes of this comparison of cost to revenue. So if you add that federal revenue with the state revenue, you get $177 million that's been appropriated for ag water quality since state fiscal year 2016, federal fiscal year 2017. So if the estimated average annual per farm cost to comply with the RAPs or the other ag water quality requirements is $90,000, and there's 558 farms in the state based on Diane's report to you, that's an annual total farm cost of compliance with the RAP of $50 million. And since state fiscal year 2016, that would be $351 million. So then if you subtract the federal and state revenue of 177 from that 351, you get 173, really $174 million of costs that have been borne by the farms for ag water quality compliance since state fiscal year 2016. So divided by the 558 farms, that's about $311,000 per farm, 300,000 per farm over 7 years, 44,000 per farm annually after a federal offset. And if you're producing on average 2.6 million pounds per year, that's $1.71 per hundredweight.
Is 2.6 million pounds, is that an MFO or an LFO? Do you know? I mean,
That was the average annual production per farm in the state. So there are definitely many that produce more than that, and then there are some that are under that. But these are not the only requirements that a farm in Vermont is subject to. There are other unique Vermont environmental laws, including stormwater construction.
Mike, can I just ask you, that's the net, right? $171, that's the net.
Yes. Yes. It's after the federal offset. When you calculate the federal offset per farm, it's just over 44. It's like 46,000. Hold on a second.
It's about half of what you.
Right. Yeah, it's right. It's 45,461 a year.
And you figured 90.
Yeah.
So it's almost exactly half. So 340 is the per hundredweight total, and the money's available is so half and half.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
But I think this number $1.71 is low because of the additional costs. If you need to build a farm structure and it's on an acre, soon to be a half acre, you are going to need a permit from A&R. And that permit can be $100 to up to $1,200 or $1,800. Similarly, if you're going to move 10 cubic yards or more of in-stream material in a stream, say to put in a new stream crossing that meets the RAP requirements for stream crossing or NRCS requirements for stream crossing, you're going to need a permit. And that's going to be $200 to $350. If you're going to put that stream crossing in a flood hazard area, FEMA requires that be permitted by the state or a local municipality in some way. And so that will require an A&R flood hazard area permit. And that's between $200 and $350, I believe. Yep, $200 and $350.
Yeah.
And then say you're going to build that farm structure, new barn, new bunk silo, and you have to disturb a half acre of a wetland or a half acre of the buffer of the wetland. Well, then you're going to be paying 75 cents per square foot of proposed impact on the wetland and 25 cents per square foot.
That's thousands of dollars
Yeah,
there.
yeah, I'll show you that in a minute. And then if you're going to do any drainage from that new structure to say the AOT right away, you're going to have to pay a permit to AOT for access to the right of way. For farming, it's usually pretty minor. It's usually just $100 for the drainage. But if it's some sort of major commercial development, it's going to be $2,500. And then there's your pesticide applicator permit. It's $25 every 5 years. Not so bad. Then there's the unique to Vermont waste provisions. Say if you have construction debris from your construction of that farm structure, you have to dispose of it at one of the facilities, landfill facilities that accepts construction debris. The fee depends on where you are, depends on the facility, it depends on the nature of your waste, but generally it's about $149 per ton. And then there's other solid waste requirements. If you're going to be land applying biosolids or sludge, you need to have a permit from A&R for that, and that's $1,000 per site.
And now, Michael, are these specific to just Vermont, or do other states charge these same fees?
No, these are specific, like the construction debris, that's a Vermont specific requirement and Vermont specific fees. The pesticide applicator permit, that's pretty uniform across the country. The right-of-way permit, that's in a Vermont requirement. The wetlands permit, that's a Vermont requirement. Some states don't even have state wetlands requirements. They just rely on the U.S. Corps of Engineers. The flood hazard area permit, that's really unique to Vermont because FEMA was going to revoke flood insurance in Vermont because Vermont was not regulating certain things that are development within the flood hazard area, including farming, forestry, state buildings, and things of that kind, because they're exempt from local land use control. So FEMA basically forced Vermont to adopt this unique program. So these are all Vermont specific, except maybe the pesticide applicator one, balls.
Mike?
Yep.
So, I don't know if your equivalent in other states has done the same sort of number crunching to see what other dairy producing states, have to pay for environmental compliance. But just from what it sounds like, does Vermont have probably the highest environmental compliance numbers in the country?
I couldn't say that definitively. I think they are going to be on the higher end. One of the things that I will recommend as a takeaway is that you ask JFO to dive deeper into this analysis, because I have an economics degree, but I went to law school for a reason instead of getting an MBA. I can't do the math. But so I think talking to people like Farm Credit who do a cost of production analysis, talking the JFO to see if they can get more detail, see if they can compare it to other states. I think that would be worthwhile. Because when you go to this kind of spreadsheet, say you're an MFO and you want to build a farm structure and you want to build a new stream crossing that complies with the RAPs. First, you're going to pay $1,500 for your permit. Then you're going to do your $90,000 for compliance with the RAPs in your MFO permit. You're going to need a stormwater construction permit for that farm structure. That's $500. You're going to need a stream alt permit for the stream crossing. That's $200. The stream crossing is in flood hazard area. You're going to need a permit there, so $350. You're going to impact a half acre of wetlands and a half acre of wetlands buffer. That's going to be $21,000 total. Get your pesticide applicator certification, and then you dispose of 3 tons of construction and demolition debris, and you get your AOT permit. That's $114,000 that year. And that's probably low, because if you look at that spreadsheet, I didn't include professional services. Your wetlands contractor's not there. What you need to do to comply with your stormwater construction permit is not there. That costs money. What you're doing to put in your stream crossing is not accounted for in this. So the 114 is probably low. But if you cost that out, say the farm is producing 2.6 million pounds per year, on average, that's 26,000 per hundredweight offset from the state federal funding. You're talking about $2.66 a hundredweight to comply with environmental requirements. $2.66 per hundredweight.
For one project.
Well, this is annual. It's an annual cost.
Oh, that's right.
Figured out over. But that's,
Milk goes down, you're
Kinda.
kind of screwed.
I knew Michael was going to find some funny stuff when you start digging, but
So
I didn't figure on,
the environmental costs of compliance across the federal order 1 states are not the same. I acknowledge Representative O'Brien's point that there are probably requirements in those other states that are comparable. And for example, I referenced earlier that New York is going to a new permit that begins in 2023. It's going to be more similar to Vermont's program at that point. They're going to try to get those legacy farms to stop discharging. But they're still going to have a permit that allows some of those farms to grandfather in. So it won't be exactly the same in 2023. But one of the takeaways from this is these environmental costs are not incorporated into the Milk Market Order 1. Maybe some of them are in, say, the farm credit cost of production analysis, but I don't know how they distinguish what are and what are not. So I think you need to talk to people like Farm Credit, talk to JFO, because if you're going to do an overorder pricing system, you want to account for these environmental costs, I think you need to have a more detailed analysis of what they are.
well, I don't know if it's necessary to zero out any particular single cost, but it's certainly important to figure out in general what our dairy farmers' costs are compared to our neighboring dairy farmers from other states that ship milk into the same federal order. And if there's a vast difference there, it's putting our guys at a big disadvantage because they've got this extra payout, and whereas their competition doesn't have that payout. And if we're doing all these good things that I guess a lot of people think had to be done, well, maybe that's why people like to come here. Maybe that's why people are buying second homes here. There's a lot of things why people want to come to Vermont and not say upper state New Hampshire. But it shouldn't be our farmers, our 580 or 50 or so farmers that are footing the bill for all these good things that it should be figured into the price that they get paid to produce milk, because that's their income.
Maybe when you ask you said that one of the next meetings, you're going to have farmers come in, ask them what they're paying, ask them what they've paid over 5 years for environmental costs and what it costs them annually. I think it'd be very interesting to hear what they have to say personally.
It seems to me there's two other things. One is what Jackie's saying. Nobody's been asking this really.
Right.
Now we're asking.
We've just been figuring they're going to do it because they have to.
Yeah, and it'll get paid somehow.
Mhm.
But how's it get paid? And then, but I think, Bobby, the sort of other side of the lens of what you're saying is why people come here, but is it also why people buy Ben and Jerry's ice cream or Cabot cheese? Because it's got that Vermont brand of quality and environmental goodness. So, and the farmers aren't seeing necessarily some return on that in the marketplace. I think Ben and Jerry's is marketing to some extent on that. But are they charging some kind of a premium for the milk that is reflected in the value of the milk, but not necessarily getting back to the farmer? I think that it's their program. What's their program is called?
Caring dairy,
Caring Dairy.
but the milk isn't segregated, so it doesn't.
Sure.
You can't account for it anywhere.
They got in a little bit of trouble,
Yeah, well,
but they are paying the farmers.
they are,
for some of the things.
but it is.
So
But
it's,
yeah,
the question's not getting asked. We're asking the questions.
Well, I know I have my wife's side of the family has nieces in Arizona. And I mean, we have to send them Cabot cheese or they have to drive quite a ways to find it. And they said it's unbelievable the difference in what they buy locally and what comes out of Cabot. And I wouldn't even think of buying any other cheese but than
Good thing.
Cabot.
Well, this is something that we've talked about previously in terms of how to increase income ultimately in some way for farmers. That is the fact that we all know that Vermont milk is better than milk coming from any place else,
It is.
or at least the advertising and marketing that we do should be saying that. And that in terms of a way to ultimately increase income is something that may make sense. Now, obviously, California did this, if you remember, California milk production some years. How successful it was, I don't know. But again, this also,
Pretty successful. They're now 25% of the milk supply. Yeah.
many of us.
but this also
boycotted
goes to,
California.
this is a very important piece of the economics of farming. But we don't know all the other pieces. And one of the things that I think we ought to be looking at as this group is, as you look at a representative sample of farms of various kinds, to try to delve into the numbers of what the actual costs are and what the actual profit margin is. And I haven't seen that yet. This is, I think, gives us some very good messages or important messages to know, but how it's actually, how it actually comes out in terms of all of the other costs and all of the other profits that come out of farming. We still don't know that, I don't think.
So we look at market impact. You've got the minimum regulated price, the mailbox price, that's what they get paid.
Mhm.
Cost of production, what Mike referenced, Farm Credit, they do an analysis of the higher performing farms, but there is information that we will add to the mix.
Yeah, I don't know how how you'd ever get those solid numbers from. I mean, the big guys have bookkeepers and accountants and
Mhm.
all that. But I'll bet you there's a lot of even
Mhm.
medium-sized farms, and especially on the smaller farms. I bet the wife or somebody within the family takes care of the
Mhm.
bookkeeping, and probably it's the wife that gets stuck with that burden. And there's probably usually some pretty big holes there that they're waiting for the next milk check to come before they can pay the
Mhm.
next bills. But I don't know if
Well,
this is
Bobby,
true.
the main cost of production study is
Wow.
meant to fill exactly the hole you're talking about. So,
Mhm.
so between farm credit and the main cost of production study, you get a pretty good picture.
Yeah.
And the main farms, they don't have as many big farms, so it's a little biased towards the smaller farms, but pretty good analysis.
So as you look at the analyses that come out in terms of the components of expense, are we seeing, for example, these components of expense that we're looking at?
Exactly.
And if we're not seeing it, then that's,
This one is
Said
not in,
something.
and that's what prompted this
yeah,
discussion.
so I mean, it's important.
That's what's coming. That's what, hopefully
Yeah.
we'll have some discussion with the dairy economists about
Mhm.
cost of production.
Yeah.
And how these are or not accounted. Economists
Mhm.
tend to think of them as externalities and they're not included as a cost of production.
But the processors also have these also. They have environmental issues that they have to deal with that we're not looking at that could be. I mean, I just don't, I'm so for making the farmers whole, but I also want to be careful that we don't forget that the people who are processing also have environmental issues that they have to take care of. And I understand that they can spread it out and it's a whole different animal, but they're dairy processors and owned by co-ops, owned by farmers. So we've got to be careful how we match and mix and match these.
Here's a question. Is our environmental compliance costs included in the make allowance?
Are they? I don't know.
Good question.
But
Might be. I mean, the make allowance is in there.
It would be a perfect place to put it, but there's nothing comparative on the other side except for what Michael's just presented.
Have to see.
I think the big issue, Jackie, is if you're milking cows, because your costs go up a little bit, you can't call, even though you're the part owner of the operation, you can't call up your owner or your representative and say, my costs just went up 10 cents, 20 cents, a hundredweight, and I can prove it to you. You're going to have to pay me that extra 20 cents. Hell, that'd be like talking to the window. And whereas if I'm making cheese or ice cream, my costs go up 10 or 15 cents. I can add a mill onto each pack of cheese or few mills or onto the ice cream bar and pass it on to the consumer and get my money
Hope they
back.
pay the
But
increase.
see, I don't know. I didn't ask you about checking out like compliance with processors. I know in Troy, when Kraft Cheese was there, we put a sewer pipe in, a sewer line, and they had to pay
Mhm.
their share, but there wasn't additional costs. I mean, everybody in the town chipped in to get
Mhm.
on the sewer line to keep Kraft there. I know Cabot has a sewer line because I've talked to them recently about doing additional housing over there
Mhm.
for their workers,
Mhm.
and that they could hook into their town municipal.
Mhm.
But I don't know if there are other these environmental things that you talked to, and I didn't ask about you checking them either, Michael.
They do have costs, and Cabot has, I'll just use Cabot as an example. They had two major costs one at the Cabot plant in Cabot, because their sewer wasn't big enough for all their flow. So they were doing land application,
Yeah.
and that was a big cost, and it was not, it was a little bit controversial as well. And then down in Middlebury, they used to be on town water to make their cheese, and then you put in the ag exemption to the groundwater withdrawal permit. So they put in wells instead. So they are no longer paying the municipal water fee because they are exempt from the groundwater withdrawal permit.
But I would also say that those same two plants, just because I used to be town clerk in Cabot, the taxes that Cabot pays to the town of Cabot used to cover the roads, the whole road budget. So it isn't as if, they're tying into these and they're not giving back to the community. It's kept them there to pay taxes, which go to support both those towns. So, it's all
Part of the mix.
it's like the EB5 chart,
No, it's not.
Well,
At
actually,
least we hope it's not.
No, I know.
actually, you brought it up. I wasn't going to mention it, but J Peak picked up Kraft Foods allotment
Of
And-
water, of septic.
and septic allowance into the sewer project. So there was some good that came out of that deal because the town was going to be, or the co-op was going to get stuck paying that bill. But anyways, is that something we'd ask? Well, first of all, we should get JFO to check Michael's numbers. And I think it would be good to, get Farm Credit to look at this and see if they'd come back with whatever.
Or if they are,
Yeah, that's.
if they are.
Yeah. So we could do those two. And
And ask farmers individually what they're,
Right.
because you wanted to get a small, medium and large farm coming in, ask them all what they have had to do.
And when we talked about planning the next meeting, I don't know how time-wise, how that's gonna work out if we have, say, 3 farms and the 3 processors, if we'll have time and one meeting to do all of that, or if we should do one group and then do other issues, and then have the processors. And so that I don't like crowding people on time. When we're in the legislature, we do an agenda, but we can always work it into the next day or the following week to accommodate people. And so I don't think we should be crowding any witnesses to hurry with their testimony. I don't know what the rest of you think. Dan, you're co-chair. What do you think we'd have time with?
No. I think it's a meeting and a half.
Yeah.
Well, the other issue is you're looking at changing dates and
Well,
those
we
dates I'm
gotta
not
get
available.
back on the schedule here because the Mondays, it seemed like the Mondays worked
until they didn't.
until we got to the ambiguous holiday
Easy now, Mr. Starr.
and doctor appointments. And so I think we should see if people are still free on there every other Monday, so we can get like the next meeting, we've got to move because we already planned that's the day before election and
Well, by then it's too late, Bobby.
well, I think it was discussed about, waiving.
Yeah, I know.
Doing all that. And so
So we've moved them,
moved that meeting to,
and I can't be at the new date. I've got Zooms that day already,
didn't we move it to the next
14.
day?
What we were talking about.
Yeah,
We proposed it so we could talk about it at this meeting as to whether it would work.
yeah. And
Michael, is that on our website? Thank you.
so, what day would, for our next, we should meet in 2 weeks. And so what day is open for,
Well, if I'm the only one that misses the 14th, then that's habit. I mean, I can always watch the video and scream at you from my kitchen table. Which is a lot better than being here and screaming at you.
well, I think I could handle a little of it. I probably wouldn't handle much of it.
What's screaming.
So, Randy, what do you got?
You're looking at what, the 14th?
Mhm.
Yeah,
We've got to be here for another meeting on the 14th, but it's in the afternoon. I don't know if I can take a whole day.
What about the folks on the screen?
John and Michael,
I could do the 14th, yes.
for
14 good with me.
the 14th.
Yeah, it should be all right.
Yeah, John,
Yep, looks good.
I wonder about Nick. We can check with Nick. Heather, how's the 14th look?
I can do, if it's at the same time, I can do part of it. I have another meeting at 11:30, so most of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, all the important stuff is said by 11:30, so you should be fine.
Right.
So that would work for you.
I got it.
Dan,
I'm good.
you're good. So Jackie, you already have a meeting.
I have 2 meetings that day already.
And, but you can get
I
the,
can look at the recording afterwards and
Yeah.
get back to y'all.
so we'll, our next meeting, and Andrew didn't even ask you, that's not very.
They're
quiet.
very quiet.
Yeah, it doesn't, I can't make that meeting that day.
We can get together and watch it on, watch the recording.
But hopefully we can get back to our regular schedule to,
So then you've got, so the suggestion was then the 21st of November and then the 5th of December. Are those all good dates while we're here for everybody?
So we do
21st?
14th and the 21st, that's 2 meetings in a row.
I've got another meeting on the 21st in the
I,
morning.
we wouldn't have them a week apart.
That's what it would be.
Yeah, but we wouldn't,
Well, that was the suggestion that was on the email that went.
So we're talking about not doing that.
yeah.
When is our report due to the
Is-
legislature?
You,
February.
I mean, there's, the three of us spend a lot of time in between
Secret
getting all,
meetings?
yeah, no, planning meetings.
No, not even preparation.
Yeah, I mean, just getting,
So what do we, so if we look ahead, then we're looking at getting processors in, we're looking at getting Yankee Farm credit in, we're looking at getting farmers in.
Yeah.
And
then the last meetings,
Market
Wow.
impact.
market impact with the consumers, yeah.
And
yeah,
the plants too.
So, just quick, I think everybody saw the information that Mark Canella had sent out about the cost of conservation on farms. I'm pretty sure Linda had sent that out. I mean, it's a little bit different than what Michael was talking about, because those are in some ways defined costs. This was really an analysis done by Mark Canella at UVM and the farm viability team, sort of really trying to understand what is sort of the water quality regulations costing farmers. I'm pretty sure, I thought Linda sent out an email and a report that he had sent, and I know he's been very interested in sharing that. I think it's really important information in regards to the conversation that at the end here today. And maybe some of those farmers that they worked with would be good farmers to bring in and talk about for some of these costs. Again, it's different than like, you know, a permit somebody might have to get. This was a bit more broader than that, you know, like as an example, if a small farm needs to put in a manure pit kind of thing to meet water quality regulations, you know, how is that impacting farm viability? So it's a little bit different than what we were talking about, but still really important, might be something and someone we want to hear from.
So we were thinking, you know, next meeting, we're gonna have some farmers.
Yeah,
Why couldn't we have him, if he's free, come the same day?
yeah, I think that would be good. Again, you know, it's a little bit different, but I think really important. Clearly, you know, what they have shown is that meeting the regulatory requirements, the clean water quality requirements, you know, is a financial burden and on farms. And they looked at different demographics too, I believe, you know, small farms, medium, large, etc. So I think it would be good to hear from him, and I think he has a pretty refined presentation, you know, that he can deliver efficiently and really add to the conversation.
Yeah, thank you. What, do you have his name?
Do you want me to CC you, Michael, and just
Yeah, that'd be
connect you, if that's helpful? I don't want to.
And
All of these meetings seem to be focused on gathering information. At what point will we have a meeting to discuss what we're going to write?
well, I think it's important to have it's important that we know and understand who's where.
No, I absolutely
And-
understand, but at some point,
I
if we're
think-
charged with doing a report, when are we going to do the report?
I think it'll
And should we
take,
have a meeting that discusses what it is that we have synthesized from all of this information that we've gathered that we want to report on?
Sure.
I think it's gonna take 2 or 3 of those meetings. And
exactly.
we're up to meeting number, is this 4 or 5?
And then you've got the holidays coming,
Yeah.
and then you're back in session.
Yeah.
So it'll have to be Monday meetings.
You're in already.
What's that? Question.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd have to worry about it.
Leap of faith here, right?
Oh, we'll still do the compact.
Well, you'll still be on this committee whether you come back or not.
Is this the 4th one, Michael?
This is technically your 5th meeting of
Yeah.
2022.
This one?
Were we on
So
a
we have
quota?
5.
What's our quota, Mike?
Wow, we have
Oh, for
5.
10.
10.
10.
10?
5 more, so I wouldn't worry about, and if we needed another one. But we don't have to get this done in no set date, is there, Michael?
January 15th, 2023 is when the legislation says the report's due, but you got Martin Luther King holiday in that time frame, and and nobody's gonna.
Question, if we needed.
Somebody's gonna miss us.
The problem is,
You just started late.
4 of us on this committee usually get pretty busy.
Yeah.
And so, and Mike's the chair, and John certainly,
John's
aren't
unopposed.
you in line, John,
He's unopposed down there.
to get something?
Oh, who knows?
Well, but, you know, we get busy with legislation, so I think this is very important, and I would certainly make time, whatever day if we have to extend our into January, but we've still got 2 months. We got all of
We got
November
holidays,
and we've got,
Christmas, and
Well,
then there's
first
2 Monday
couple-
holidays in January, right?
yeah, so we got 1, 2, 3.
Well, maybe, so
Maybe.
we had a list of people that we wanted to see. Maybe between the three of you, you could sit down and figure out how you're going to schedule that. And to Senator
Yeah.
Brock's piece, leave the last, at least one, or if we had to
Sure.
add two as this is the drop dead, we're writing this thing piece, because if it's going to require legislation, we're going to have to do that sooner rather than later.
That's what we do at our secret meetings.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
the rest of us should have a secret meeting, right?
Well,
Yeah, they're secret, all
Yeah.
right.
The dates for the next 2 meetings to repeat are, what are the dates?
14th,
14th,
and then you had
December,
you had the 21st and
Never
the
know.
5th.
the 5th. So the 14th, November 14th and December 5th. Those are our next 2 meetings.
November 14th and December 5th. Is that right?
Do you want to have this? You want to be in this room?
Yes.
As long as the heat's on. You really did make a difference. Oh, yeah, it's so much nicer in here.
Anything else, any of the members would like to bring up or discuss, today?
We have time to get more into the administrative procedures that would surround this. Do you have a time frame of when that meeting
Yeah,
might
we're
be?
hoping if that's included in the next 2 meetings.
Okay.
Kind of pulls it together. Yeah,
I'd like to be here for that.
but we're
sure.
hoping you're gonna,
Okay,
at our secret meetings, we're planning to.
You're invited to the secret meeting?
No, no.
apparently I
Not
was.
yet, not yet.
Not necessarily invited, but the secret
Wow, this
meeting
is like a cabal here.
will come out with that she has to do some work.
Yeah,
Francis kicked me out of a secret meeting one time
Did he?
and gave me a job while I was outside.
had you rake lawn or
Yeah,
something?
outside the.
So I'll write the compact
Oh,
within 6 weeks.
Yeah.
That was the good one.
well, I think had a good meeting today and a lot more, now we'll, make arrangements to get hold of, JFO as well as, Farm Credit and see if they'll look at Michael's work and go from there and,
And had Heather Swift's.
and
Mark Canella.
yeah, we have his name or you'll have it in his contact. So hopefully we'll hear from some farmers.
So are you asking for names?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if you have somebody that's into it, good and
I would suggest Jane.
So the starting point are the witnesses we had early on, and then in addition to that.
Well, she's just done a manure thing. And so she knows all these costs. So she's an MFO. And she ships to DFA. So that's one, I don't know.
Signed
which
her up,
one.
well, she's not in the room.
Yeah, she's-
There you go.
I am setting her up.
There you go.
So I guess with that, we'll adjourn the meeting and want to thank all of you for your time and energy and effort. And we'll see you on the 14th.